Okay. Brian, does it look like it's on? I mean, can you tell?
I can check. Yeah, it says it'll begin in a few minutes. Did you hit broadcast?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll just have to post a video later because it is recording. So.
Okay, so we are good to go. All right, guys. So some of you have been asking about this, and it's not that we're trying to keep it secret or anything like that. It just, I hadn't been able to get to the office for a while. Here we are. It's worth talking about now. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, Marten is a project that Corey and I have been working on and off for 3 or 4 months. It's something we've talked about a long time. It's trying to see if we can get the very latest versions of PostgreSQL to act like a document database, specifically for .NET development. And to be very clear, this is meant, if this effort succeeds, it's meant to be a replacement for RavenDB for us. As a secondary goal I'll get into, we might also come up with some event sourcing, event store functionality in Marten, which could also be a possible replacement for event store for us. Maybe. So, Marten, we're building this as an open source library. It's up on GitHub. That's turned out to be tremendously valuable. We've had quite a bit of interest. I think we're up to 11 or 12 committers now, people that send in pull requests. We've gotten some very substantial pull requests, big features, ideas that I don't know that we necessarily need, but that other people want. I guess what I'm saying is Marten is looking like it could be a very viable OSS project, which is if we do end up adopting it, that's only good for us if more people are looking into it and poking around and improving it. It has a chance of being viable. So we're trying to turn Postgres into a document database so we can use it in our .NET projects, and it is absolutely meant to be our replacement for RavenDB. And for the folks at home. Okay, so why would we want to do a document database? And I'm almost making the safe assumption here that most of us are coming from years and years of using relational databases. Relational databases have been the go-to approach for my entire career. I wasn't around for the really old, strange file-based things. And for a long time, this went completely unchallenged. But there's a lot of issues and a lot of things where a relational database causes a lot of friction for us building an application on. Document database, on the other hand, we can dodge all of that effort for database migrations. All the work that you would have to do with the relational system to try to have the database version and built up to where you always have an accurate representation of the latest thing for your application to develop against. There's a lot less mechanical work with the document database where the schema pretty well reflects what the code says it should be. Okay? From my side, so I've got a background with extreme programming and all that kind of stuff from about 10 years ago, where we were obsessed with this idea of evolutionary and emergent and continuous design. And if you're going to do that and make it safe, you need to be able to quickly apply small changes to the system without a lot of work. Sometimes relational databases, they don't have a lot of reversibility. It makes you pay a mechanical cost for not having things right up front. You can't really make incremental changes quite as fast. If you add a field using a relational database, it's changing the DDL, maybe changing a migration, changing places in the code. If you're using an OR mapper, you may have to change your maps. There's a lot of mechanical work to follow the wormhole that we might be able to completely dodge with the document database. Now, talking about how we consume data in our systems. It's not good enough to grab a two-dimensional or matrix of data. We don't just grab and work raw against ADO record sets anymore. I did that a lot in my early careers. It generally led to some really horrific middle tier code. Instead, the data that we need probably needs to be in a different shape. The real world is hierarchical. We have polymorphism. It doesn't necessarily fit into a relational database model for every problem domain. So document databases are really nice because you're persisting what your object state is. If it's events, that makes it really easy. You're effectively serializing your object state to JSON back and forth. It does introduce other problems, but we've all heard years and years of ORMs, the Vietnam of software development, the impedance mismatch, and all that work you have to do to go back and forth between the data, the way the application uses it, and the way the relational database needs to scatter it through the tables. If we can just make that work go away. So this is another big one for me. Automated testing is much easier against a document database than it can be against a relational database. The relational part of the database actually can make test automation harder. If I want automated tests to be effective, to be reliable, to be able to run these more than once or twice, I need to really drive out as part of the test, this is exactly what test data should be. Relational databases, the big relational part, you end up filling in a lot of data for your tests that may not be germane at all for what you need, what you're really trying to do, but it's necessary to solve what the database requires. That's a bit of friction. My experience is tearing down state in a relational database is a lot slower. It has to filter through. I mean, you can beat that by truncating tables and cascading deletes and all kinds of other things, but it's still a tremendous amount of work. My experience has been pretty consistent, and I think I'm going to feel like it's even proven out with Marten. Database setup and being able to tear down state and set back up is faster with the document database. So why PostgreSQL? And I'll have to admit, until a couple of years ago, Postgres is one of those things I'd heard of for years and never played with until Corey pretty well made me. And it turns out Postgres is pretty cool. It's been around a long time. It's used on a lot of big projects. But even though it's 20 years old, it has a crazy vibrant community around it. Right now, it seems to have a tremendous amount of energy. They're not just putting in new features and fixing problems. They're doing some really innovative stuff that I certainly didn't see when I considered myself to be a database guru kind of guy 15 years ago with Oracle. Specifically for us, and why Marten might be a viable project, the JSON support inside of Postgres, it's like nothing else out there, and it continues to get better. Postgres has specific features to make it very efficient to store JSON structures. You can actually store it as a binary form. We have ability to query within the JSON. So, and you'll see that when we talk about the link support inside of Marten. There are ways, I don't know if this has become valuable. One of the criticisms from people from MongoDB about Postgres is, oh, you can't do partial updates. You have to pull it down and put it up. And as of Postgres 9.5, which released last week, if this is necessary, there's going to be an equivalent to Raven's patch API. We could actually do partial updates to documents without having to first load it and shove it back in. Okay? And for us, I know a lot of you are familiar with the trouble and the struggles we're having with RavenDB. By building on top of existing PostgreSQL, we're going to get all of the grown-up DevOps tools that it already has. I'm kind of thinking what I hear is this is a lot of our biggest struggles with Raven, right?
It's administration after the fact in production, yeah.
Yeah. We're not really going to be on a breakaway database. We're with something that's pretty commonly used. It's going to come with all the grown-up tools.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
I don't want to derail it or anything. So I know the new SQL Server is going to have some JSON support as well. Very little though. Yeah. What's the difference?
It's an order of magnitude difference. It's you remember the old select for XML kind of thing?
I do.
It's the same kind of thing. You can make a query and just say, I want the results coming out as JSON.
And they do have a JSON column, data type, but there's zero query support against it. Like it's just basically like you would say, I want to store it as XML. but you don't even have the same query capabilities that you do with XML.
Yeah, that at least had extra.
It is foundational. Like I think, in the next version they probably will add query operators, but
it's
as of
not
right
ready.
now, it's not viable.
Okay.
So talking about moving away from this de facto idea that we're automatically going to use a relational database strategy for every possible persistence problem under the sun. Right. The last 5 years, we've probably seen a move away from that default standpoint. We've got other options. Well, the great things, if we do get to pull down Postgres, is even in the same project, if you really need to, we got a lot of different approaches we can use without having a separate project. Even to the point of being able to carry out some of these things within the same database transaction. Okay? Postgres, it is still a relational database. Where that's valuable, where it's valuable and where it's still useful, reporting, querying, client-side things, places where we need to do data aggregation, where databases still kind of rock, you just do that. We're going to be able to treat Postgres as a document database and get all those advantages of development time that we want for the things we're doing that are transactional and are actual problem domain, right? We could use it for event sourcing. I don't know if that's an immediate need, but it's something that could be a possibility for us. If we want to, we can still pull off one of the heavy ORMs. The new Entity Framework is adopting Postgres as the de facto standard for non-Windows boxes, but it'll support this anyway. I mean, Hibernate still exists. I have a deep background within Hibernate way back when. I'm okay with us never using it again. We can use micro RMs if that's valuable, Dapper, Petapoco like we do today, Massive, whatever the other ones are. I'm not a big fan, but I know a lot of you guys are, and they're definitely easy when they work. So we've got options. We can actually take something that fits whatever project we're doing. So I think we started working on Marten late September, early October.
It's October.
Yeah, because it was going pretty well by the time we got to Dallas. So the things that are done today, we have a lot of the basic link querying. I mean, link is one of the things that I still love about .NET. Everybody's going to want to keep it. Looked at our single biggest project that uses Raven, tried to scrape through to see what were the operators and the type of queries they were doing in that project, and make sure that Marten could do all of that. There's one big weird outlier thing I haven't gotten yet, just being able to search within a child collection, but it is possible. So we have quite a bit of link support. That went much better than I imagined. I'd been intimidated to try doing that for years, and just didn't turn out to be that bad. For you guys that are curious, it uses Relink. That's an OSS project that is the same thing that Entity Framework 7 or whatever, Entity Framework Core, whatever it is today. It's the same thing they use to build their own link support, and it's been nice. Also have the ability to just bypass all of link and go straight at, feed it the SQL yourself. There's always going to be cases where you just can't make the link thing do exactly what you want. You can go straight at Postgres SQL, use all of their raw JSON operators, and possibly make it a lot easier than the equivalent link would be. So you always get that end around the link support. We can find by key. You can find something, there's just some helper methods specifically to, I want to find this document type by its ID. We'll support, you can either do natural keys through strings, you can use GUIDs, and Marten will assign the GUID for you if you haven't already. We're supporting integers and longs so far using a high-low strategy. There's a possibility that we may pick up Postgres sequences. There's also a possibility of maybe using some kind of star algorithm later for this, but that's not going to try doing that until we absolutely need it. You can load the raw JSON. If you just want to search, think about a web application where all you want to do is grab a document that's stored in the database and immediately stream it down the HTTP pipeline. In that case, you don't want to take that JSON, serialize it into an object, and immediately deserialize it out to get the exact same string. Just take the string, ship it right down the line. That's going to be a massive performance improvement for us in a few places. Okay, so right off the bat, we do have unit of work support. If you're not familiar with that, that's just the basic pattern of gathering up a transaction. Say, just like with Raven, this document session, I could say this one's saved, this one's new, this one's saved, and at the end of the day, persist all the changes in one database transaction. Somewhat closely related to that, and this wasn't a RavenDB support, but I don't know if we took advantage of it too well. Daryl, you remember the users and all that work you did to cache the current user in all those places? If I had designed the user document structure 5 years ago to use the username as the natural key, you could have just used Raven's identity map and not had to worry about that. You're welcome. So what identity map means, this is a concept you'll find in ORMs. It's in Hibernate, it's in EF, it was in RavenDB. I don't know if we took advantage of it. But within a session, if I ask for the same type of document with the same ID, it remembers it, and it just gives you the exact same object out, so you don't have to keep hitting the database. Marten comes with a couple different flavors of document sessions that is a little bit different than RavenDB. So you have a flavor that's pure lightweight. Doesn't track anything, it doesn't do any dirty tracking, it doesn't do any identity map, it's just lightweight as possible. You have to do a little more work to tell it what to do, but you don't have to worry about memory leaks like you do with RavenDB holding on to things. You can use the identity map just like it is with Raven, where it will remember, it is caching things by ID where it can, but you're still telling it what needs to be persisted. And then finally, because we had users contribute it through a pull request, you have a complete dirty checking version of the document session that's doing real heavyweight stuff, that everything you load, when you try to submit the unit of work, it's checking every single object that it loaded to see if it changed. And it's doing that by doing a kind of a logical JSON comparison internally. So some people really like that because you don't have to remember to call save or update. I made sure that that was not the default behavior, that you had to explicitly opt into it because it's extremely heavyweight. And that's the kind of thing that if you weren't careful with Raven would get you to an out-of-memory exception pretty fast. Not that I'm bitter. Okay, so comparing Marten to RavenDB, because I know that's kind of the point of Marten. We have a very similar API. We have the iDocument session. We would have iDocument store. The basics of the iDocument session are very similar. Let me see if I can get away with showing code here. Very similar API. You have the same kind of load methods, query methods. Sorry, let me get to the actual document session. If you use Raven, this is pretty similar. One place where we did differ, we don't have a separate interface for async operations. It's just method async. You could probably talk me into either approach, but we had a contributor come up with a huge pull request to add this. So we're doing it the way he wanted to do it, and I'm pretty happy with it. As we maybe update some of our service bus and web framework kind of tools to get into more async friendly kind of frameworks, this is going to become more important for us. Okay, from a downside, the single feature about RavenDB that I like the best, and I've talked to plenty of other people that feel the same way, we don't have an option for RavenDB's embedded database option. The ability, if you haven't used Raven, you can actually encode, say, I want a Raven database, and run it completely in process in whatever you're doing. That made our test automation kind of awesome. We could even get to the point where we ran a clean, fresh Raven database for every new automated test. Made it real easy to avoid polluting tests with data left over from something else. We lose that. Sad trombone. So far, I have a service in there called Document Cleaner that's just a way to quickly wipe out and truncate the document tables. So far, it doesn't feel like that's going to be a big problem for performance, but you're not going to have the old Xcopy pull down the assemblies and just immediately run it with an embedded database. We're going to have to talk about how to script an install of Postgres, make sure you've got a Postgres schema up and going.
It also prevents you from running tests concurrently the way it is right now. We have ideas for how to beat that. But again, I think to Jeremy's point, we want to make sure that this is a viable option for us before we invest in that kind of thing.
Is it just too hard to implement embedded databases?
Well, it's not about being hard it's that Raven explicitly built that support in. Postgres database, the way it was built, the technical reason why is because they use fork inside the code base, and that just doesn't allow it to be embedded. I know there's some people that have been pretty vocal about it lately because more people want this capability, but until Postgres itself makes that possible, we can't add it. Now that sounds like a really bad thing, but we have a lot of options to get us to the same place. So I don't want to make it sound like we're leaving a huge thing behind. We just have to put a little bit more effort to make it work as well as it did today.
And Raven's embedded database has limitations anyway, so there are areas it just doesn't work for us. So.
The Postgres approach might be a lot easier for things like you were doing, Sam, ages ago, testing with multiple applications at the same time. And that part will get easier with Postgres. We just got stuff to figure out. And that's why we have a DevOps team now. I was just seeing if you'd make a face on that one. More Jira problems? Marten's built on PostgreSQL. We're building on something that's proven, supported. There's a lot more people behind it. I think a lot of us would probably feel better about betting our jobs on Postgres than what has happened so far with Raven when we get into the busiest times of the year. The biggest single win for RavenDB that I think our Marten over Raven, I think our developers are going to enjoy. It's ACID all the way down. So, the wait for non-stale results thing in Raven where you can't really query for a document you just saved because the indexes haven't been built yet. There's no eventual consistency. We might add that back with events, with projections, but forget that for now. When you commit a document, you can immediately query for it by name or some other property. It's there in the JSON. We can still do indexes in the JSON, whatever it takes to make it faster to read, but that's all synchronous. No more wait for non-stale results. I mean, that deserves a cheer, guys. This kills us in testing. It kills us in production. If you're not careful with the wait and you forget to put a timeout, we were hanging apps, that's going to go away. All right. So if we're going to use this, if we're actually going to put this in production, it's got to be fast enough at least. So the things we've been doing, we have put a lot of energy, and you can find blog posts, jeremydmiller.com, look for Marten. You can see a lot of blog posts where Corey badgered me into trying a couple different flavors of the Postgres JSON SQL and running a lot of different size of data at it and trying to figure out what really goes a little bit faster. And we definitely learned some things. We found a few places where the blog posts and documentation we found misled us, I thought. So we have some real-time information about how to draw up the SQL queries. So internally, There's a lot of places when you're talking about document types that Marten doesn't know about. It's the kind of framework that needs to do some reflective type approaches. Instead of using a lot of reflection against document types to pick up IDs, assign IDs, to be able to take a document and call and push that to the correct ADO.NET commands behind the scenes. So doing reflection or expressions, we're using the new Roslyn stuff where you can generate code on the fly and compile an assembly in memory. And once you take that initial hit on the first compile, you're having dynamic code built that's compiled, ready to go. That's being a nice little performance thing.
And you can actually read the code that it's generated as
Yes.
opposed to the IL stuff. So
Yes. I did a lot of IL generation in the very early versions of Structure Map, and I don't want to ever do it again. Postgres supports a lot of indexes. A lot of index types inside are on top of the JSON. We can do things called gen and gist indexes that allow you to kind of generally search over a JSON or the JSON B type more efficiently. Going even farther than that, something that's turned out to be very effective, at a little bit of cost of extra data and a little bit slower insert speed, what we can do is say, inside your JSON document, if you're going to be querying on one property a lot, what you can do is have Marten duplicate that field and just to a normal database field. So it's always going to be synced up with the actual document. When you use a link query with Marten and you try to query on that property, Marten knows that, oh, this is duplicated. I'm going to use a basic SQL query against it instead of trying to reach and search through the JSON document. And what we found is that's a massive performance optimization in reads. And at the same token, we got a little bit in Marten already to enable you to express. For this duplicated field, I also want you to put a database column on it. Where there, I think we support most. I think we already support almost every kind of index that Postgres can do. But it's in the documentation for Marten already. I forgot to talk about it here because I just flat out forgot about it. If you're running on Postgres 9.5, Marten can take advantage of the new upsert feature in Postgres. That's a little bit more efficient way to do the update it if it's there, and if not insert it. So that's really nice. I can't tell you for sure if that makes a big difference. It's still nice. If we need to, the JSON serialization is all pluggable. We did see you lose a lot of flexibility over JSON.NET, but you can swap in something called Jill that comes from the Stack Overflow people. And that's a substantially faster JSON serializer. So you can really ratchet Marten up just at the cost of, you can't do polymorphic collections or polymorphic documents. So that's going to be a possibility here and there. We're already supporting async queries. That's just a scalability thing to be a little more efficient. In the future, I'll talk about this a little bit more. We know we have some web applications where the client side needs to make a lot of queries all at one time to fill one page. And today we might be a little chattier than we should be, but in the future where we start to batch more of those queries up, what we want to do here is to define, I need this logical query, this query, this query, this query, and submit it to Postgres all at one time and get all X number of requests back and responses all at one time, trying to save chattiness to the database. When you update, when you do the document session, save changes to commit your unit of work, was able to get the batching working with the NPGSQL library. That's the ADO.NET provider for PostgreSQL. It does support the ability to send any number of deletes, inserts, and updates all in one batch in one logical ADO.NET command. From my testing, that made a pretty big difference. So that's already there. And then bulk inserts, things like we're loading initial states. Postgres has a really cool facility for bulk imports and exports. So Marten already supports the Postgres kind of batch streaming model that they have. And that's much, much faster for streaming data into the system than anything else. So, any questions while I catch my breath?
Are these indexes kind of similar to the way you do indexes in Raven? I mean, is that parity or is it different model?
These are database indexes.
Okay.
Just old-fashioned database indexes, except Postgres has some special stuff for the JSON. Another cool thing Postgres has, maybe SQL Server has this now, I don't know. You can do computed indexes. So you can say, I want you to index this function or this subquery of the JSON and make that an index.
The result is an index. Right?
So you like doing like a two lower. If you're going to be constantly searching by doing a case-insensitive two lower, you can actually create an index on the computation of this field two lower.
So when you have the repeated value from the document that makes itself to a column, is the index smart enough to take that into account?
The link support, yes.
Okay.
So you
not that the
you would
index is
define the
taking
indexes
account for
yourself.
that. Yeah, Marten is actually telling it to create an index on that column.
So,
So both. It's putting an additional index, database index on that column. But when you use the link support, it knows in its own internal model of how that particular document type is persisted, loaded, it knows to use that duplicated field instead of reaching into the JSON document.
so the Rothman stuff, that's in master?
No, it's all in master. I did write a blog post just about that. It worked out pretty well. We do or do not have it quite working for DNX.
Not quite. I mean, it's possible. I know how to get it done. Just have other priorities at the moment.
The async support, is that async all the way down? Like
The
to
async, every method has an async option.
But I mean, so is it async at the API level, or is it through the layers down to the
It's
network?
async to the NPGSQL. I have to spell it
So
out.
it's truly async.
Yes.
Cool.
To the best of my knowledge. The document database things that we still have to do, and there's probably a lot more things that have been contributed as action items to GitHub for me. And a few of these things are things that that other contributors are already looking at. But the next thing I'm going to do with Marten, the document database storage, the database creation, there's two modes we'll let you do here. We're going to have a development mode that's going to totally freak out the DBAs. That as you're working and trying to get things done, you change document, you change the ID from long to string and add more fields, or you can introduce a new document type and you try to use Marten. It'll just quietly make the table for you if it doesn't already exist and let you just go on. There's also a production mode that will throw exceptions. Just assuming that when you're in production, you can't be willy-nilly creating tables on the fly. You may not have DDL rights, that kind of stuff. But right now, the development mode is a little bit naive. I have it just checking, does this table exist or not? But what it needs to do is it needs to do a full comparison of what the table should be compared to Marten's model to what's actually there. We had an early user immediately try to change the type of the ID or something like that, and he had to wipe out the table and force Marten to create it all over again. So we need to make it more adaptive. Again, that kind of evolutionary design kind of idea. A big one, and we're just going to have to brainstorm on this, the idea of projections and read side views. So we have these documents in the database. We have 5 or 6 documents in the database, and at one point in time, your web endpoint cares about all these 5 or 6 documents, but it wants them in a certain shape. So instead of going and grabbing 5 documents, what if we could have the database basically create a query against this JSON and put it into the form we want? This isn't really well defined right now. The idea is we've kind of thrown out. Postgres supports embedding the V8 JavaScript engine inside the database itself. We could actually be writing little JavaScript things to transform one or more documents into the JSON shape you want. We could do something more like what Raven does, where you use C# code to kind of designate, this is how I want you to go from this document to this totally other type.
Does Postgres have views?
Yeah.
Would those, also be an option?
And you can always, what that is in effect saying is you can always ditch Marten and go straight at the JSON operators and views and their own stored procedures. That's going to be a nice thing about Postgres, Marten on Postgres, is you can always bypass Marten and do the raw thing. That's a lot of conjecture. We know we need it. Other people are talking about it. I think it would be very advantageous in the big application we have on top of Raven.
I think on our initial research, the materialized views that you're thinking of wouldn't work for this scenario. We haven't thought it through enough to really make one way or another. So.
I'm honestly a little bit afraid to try to tackle this until we're using it on projects and we have very concrete scenarios.
Yeah, I wondered what the JavaScript views versus the materialized views, what the difference would be there.
It's not that it's a view. It's like, think of it like a trigger. You insert this document or make a change to it, and then it reacts to that and does something with it. And it uses JavaScript to do that.
Right.
Let me actually delay that a little bit until we talk about event sourcing. Okay. That's going to come up, and it's going to sound pretty familiar to you.
Yeah.
Talk about the possibility, and I forget what any framework calls this, the idea of a compiled query, where I can say, there is some significant cost to taking a link query and parsing that up and figuring out what the SQL should be out of it. EF has a model to say, I want kind of a reusable template for this thing. So I already know what the SQL is. I know what my parameters are. I don't have to take all that expression parsing hit every single time. I don't know how valuable this is because the database time surely overwhelms the link parsing, but still, that's still an issue.
It's not just an issue with Marten, though. It's an issue for anything that uses link. So just to make that clear.
Sure. Now that I've built a link provider, it's doing a crazy amount of things. Just the link stuff isn't that cheap. We know, Corey, didn't you start looking at this a little bit?
Which one?
The version docs, the optimistic offline concurrency. Being able to have Marten automatically version documents going back and forth. So say Daryl pulls it down and he's fiddling around trying to change a document, and then Mike grabs the same document and he's fiddling with it. Daryl shoves his up first. Mike tries to push his in, but now he's no longer altering what the original document was. Let the database, let Marten actually detect, no, you're trying to update something that someone else updated between you and them, right? This is something Raven DB does today. It's surely something EF and Hibernate support.
It does, and it sounds more complicated than it is. When you use a versioning strategy, all it's really doing is it says update this document where this ID equals this and the version equals this. And then when the row count's 0, it throws an exception. So it's nothing that complicated.
Full text searching, there was somebody looking to do a pull request on this. If we don't need it, I'm going to ignore this until somebody asks for it. We've already had people ask for more options or more control about the ID generation. I got the high-low strategy working just so you could use numbers. Maybe we go to some kind of star algorithm. I don't know, but we're going to need more options than just the naive high-low generation I'm doing now. And for anybody who wants to use Postgres sequences to make this work, I take pull requests. And then I don't know if we even need to do this, but it's not that big a deal to throw some kind of diagnostics dashboard that's Marten-centric, just to try to understand things as we're doing development. Maybe have it so you have easy, quick, one-click commands to blow away this document table or delete everything, or just see what Marten thinks the world is. See the code.
Expose those diagnostics to production.
Well, we've never done that before, right?
Yeah.
Never.
But your point is the Postgres tooling itself is probably sufficient, right? The existing.
Probably. You could use pgadmin 3, or they're building something new, something that's supposed to be a lot nicer. There's existing projects. So we don't have to do this, but maybe it's cool. This would probably be a big deal, much bigger deal if we really do the event store. So if we do the event store, that goes from nice to do to we really probably should. So this is a little bit vague. I guess it's been 2 years ago now. Spent probably about 2 months doing some experimentation on Postgres, trying to use an event store with user-defined projections. In that case, that was a Node.js project. Everything was JavaScript. But we could easily do the same thing, probably adapt a lot of that PG events code that's already out there. So the event store, we capture events to a stream, okay? And from there, we should be able to support things like being able to fetch the live aggregate of a stream. You know, what's the whole state? Using snapshots to make the aggregation more efficient. We have the option, we have the proof of concept of doing the JavaScript defined projections. We're just talking about how do I take an event and then change what the aggregate is, or creating an aggregate document for the read side. So we could do these projections. This is from thinking 2 years ago. It could either be live. The projection you asked for, I want to see a projected view, and it just calculates it on the fly. So if you have a case where you have lots of writes and very few reads, do it that way. And you always get the latest up-to-date stuff. We could do things in line. If you have a few reads but lots and lots of writes, make the projection happen inside of the same transaction as the initial event capture.
Few writes, lots of
Yeah, I think the other way.
What rhymes it? And then lastly, the harder one, some types of aggregation we'd have to do with some kind of asynchronous daemon that's just listening for new events coming in and off to the side and making the updates. And this is where we would allow eventual consistency to leak back in, and this would reopen up the wait for non-stale kind of problem. But that might, in some cases, be a much more efficient way to create aggregated views inside of our database. Plus, there are some applications we have that do lend themselves very well toward event sourcing. And then lastly, I'm just talking about just a little bit of my envisioning, maybe some of the kinds of projections we should do. And this is admittedly, a lot of this is ripped off from Event Store, Greg Young's Event Store. It's their fault for writing lots of papers, lots of informative papers. But I'm looking at what they did and a little bit of what we've already had to do with our older Event Store applications. And actually with that, that is all that I have prepared. Questions, do you want to see more of the code? The code itself's not that exciting.
I think you should at least jump around and show a little bit of what's available.
Okay. Okay.
Is that your way of saying, show me the code?
I can't ask code.
Well, to a little bit of degree, this is my second big talk of the day, and I'm definitely running out of steam on you guys. So just some of the things we can do. Let me find a better example to start with. So in your system, your .NET system, you're going to have one and only one document store, whatever database you're connecting to. A lot like Raven. I tried to not need this, but it turned out to actually be valuable. You can see there's a few things. We've got the 4 different kinds of sessions here. The default, what I call lightweight, no identity map, no tracking, fast as it could possibly be, but more work on your side. The heavyweight session, we went back and forth in this a lot for the Get a Room in Marten. My big concern was I wanted to be very explicit to users. What am I signing up for when I pull a session? Am I pulling up something that is a potential memory leak or not? That was kind of to me, that was a hidden trap inside of RavenDB if you weren't careful. Then the query session, it's same stuff, but it's a read-only session. So definitely no tracking, lightweight, just get stuff. So just a little fake document type, just so that I can prove that it knows how to use an ID of an integer type. And this is doing something similar to our FubuVC applications, where it's between tests, it's creating a new session and then disposing it at the end. But inside the test, you can see very similar to Raven. I create my document, I store it, and then I commit the whole transaction. In here, I go back and I get the document store again. I open a whole new session because I'm trying to prove that I'm really persisting into the database and not just getting the cached versions. So inside you're using block. If you're working with this stuff directly, use your using block to make sure everything's cleaned up behind you. Yeah, I don't think databases are as bad as they were when I was younger about orphan connections, but let's not, don't risk that. There's your delete, and there's your save changes. Link support.
I wanted to, before you move on, well,
I'm listening.
I just wanted to see what your setup and teardown looks like in order to get the session started and then to clear out the database once your test was finished. Because you mentioned that was happening, but I just wanted to see if we start using it, this is something that we'll have to do somewhat regularly. So I wanted to see what the teardown looks like for doing the tests and stuff.
Okay, I'm getting you there. Let me just make some new code up here. I'm using Storyteller here only as a convenience, putting things together. Marten,
Structure map.
it's been a long day. Using structure map here just as convenience. Marten is not for anybody listening at home, Marten has no direct coupling to structure map. Are here. I mean, it can be as easy as this. Okay. If you're using all defaults, like this is the quick start. I just want to I want to dip my toes in this. I want to play with it before I realize it's awesome and I want to dedicate my career to it, right? Document store for a connection string. And then Steve so I kept that kind of advanced Hive thing from Raven, kind of like that. The idea of here are things you can do, but you probably shouldn't do lightly, and be careful when you're treading here. So we got a couple options here. You can either wipe down one document type at a time, or you can delete all the documents but leave the schema, or you can just say everything be gone and start all over. If you're running in the development mode, if it's fast enough, and we're just going to have to use it to find out, that's what you do.
So you might do that in like an after each or something.
Before.
Okay.
Okay, my strong bias is there. You do it before a test. So no test ever assumes that any other test is a responsible citizen.
Yeah. It's also helpful, like if a test fails,
Like with
then
an
it
exception.
stops, then you can go look at the database that didn't get wiped out.
That makes sense.
You're starting to ask something, right?
It's kind of separate subject. So
If you were still
Go ahead.
interested.
can I make one request / suggestion? Shipping XML documentation for the public API with the NuGet package.
Absolutely. What I've said on Getter, though, is not until the API feels stable.
That's really very helpful for discoverability.
I know, and it makes things rougher to work with.
Yeah.
So you kind of, it's going to happen. I've just been putting it off till things stabilize, and maybe it already is.
That's a fair point.
I feel your pain.
Thanks.
See if you'll complain and get it in my consciousness. I will try to address it someday.
And if not sooner,
I'm
do a
going
simple
to
request.
get to your cancel problem faster though. I'm not just joking there.
Just gonna leave a comment every day on GitHub just until it gets fixed.
+1.
Every day, +1 bump.
+1 again.
It works for my wife. Or-
That's
Don't-
Almost as bad as it works for me.
don't do that. My wife's trick is she just gives me a text. She just sends me a text message or whatever I'm supposed to do, and it works.
This Steve guy keeps asking me to get this done.
Ask his wife.
Oh, oh no, 'cause she would ride me until I did it. Let's not.
Now you know.
You guys are weird. My wife just puts GitHub issues on my projects.
Lindsay's putting a whiteboard up on my wall just so I can't forget about things. So just like Raven, copied straight from Raven. If I have a document session and I want to use a link provider, query whatever my type is, and I'm immediately into an iQueryable. We support a pretty healthy subset of what link can do. Equals, greater than, less than, not equals. We support string contains, string starts with, string ends with, any. We can search within primitive arrays. I don't yet have it searching within child collections, but I do know how to do it now. That'll happen someday. Trying to think. We can use nullable types. We can support on strings, numbers. Booleans are a little bit special. I don't remember where it ended up with the numerations. Let me see. So that was actually, I was having a little trouble with, nope, there you go. So you can search for by enums. Had a little trouble with the underlying NPG SQL library. And then,
Is there a reason some of your selects and order bys are after your two array call? Is that
yes, absolutely. We do not support select on the iQueryable. You
Okay.
you have to do,
get it in memory and then?
yes.
everything?
I don't know if I don't yet know if we need to do that or not.
Okay.
It makes the link, that adds a lot of complexity to the link stuff. But I take pull requests. That's something we probably ought to do before this hits a lot of people. Good catch. And just to show you this is possible. So if you really, really want to, you can push the data in yourself. You can either put the whole data in with the full select. There are some Postgres tricks where you're going to need to do all of it. Or you can just use the where and let it deal with the select and what the actual table name is. And I'm not showing this here, but it does support parameterized queries before. You just use a question mark for where the parameter value is and put them in order that it appears in the SQL string. But by querying user, it's still executing the right SQL statements. It's still going through the identity map stuff, deserializing to you and giving you the real objects. So this is the end around. If something isn't supported by link and Postgres could do it, you always have this option. And you can start doing things like joins, and I forgot about it, but we have talked about maybe still being able to use foreign keys between document relationships. Maybe this gives you include someday. Maybe.
So the other thing that wasn't touched on too much, although we hinted at it with like richer tooling support. So one of the challenges we have today with Raven is our reporting teams and things that need to grab things out of the Raven database. it's a lot more cumbersome for them to do that and to generate something that they can put into their reporting databases. Because this is Postgres, I mean, all of their existing tooling like SSIS and all of their existing migration tools will just work against this, even in the JSON data type, because they have access to the raw SQL capabilities. So I think in that way, we would also gain a lot of benefit for the other teams as well.
In Postgres, the JSON support also includes the ability to go. You can go from old-fashioned records to JSON, just like SQL Server does. You can also go from a JSON document and project it out to a normal select statement kind of thing.
Get like a tabular results back.
Yeah. So, I mean, all those 1,000,001 existing developer tools, reporting apps that work against relational database, we still have the ability to do that. We could possibly do kind of persistent projections to be creating those read-side flat tables as we go as well.
Did you say that select was not implemented in the?
It means that
In the
it's,
projection part of select.
Oh, I see.
so you're
because it's
you're
hard.
querying from the document, but projecting it into some completely different structure.
Yeah.
An entity framework against a tabular result set would actually change the underlying query to then only select those columns.
Oh, okay.
That's what is not being done here.
I was like, does that mean this is gonna break?
No, the intent being you grab the document and get it in memory before you start
Right.
changing
It-
its form.
I played around with trying to do it one day, and it turned out to be hard. Not hard, but kind of tricky with the relink stuff and the queryable. And it's one of those things where I was leaving it until we actually need it. I'm already saying Marten is as far along as it needs to be and as a proof of concept until we're going to try to use this on a real thing. I don't want to put any more time into it until it's real.
And like he said, he based the API surface on what a one exchange was using. So
There's not a lot of select going on.
yeah, there's not a lot of holes. I think he noticed like one thing that was doing something crazy, but we might suggest that gets changed anyway.
Different way to
So.
do it.
Well, I don't know why exactly it's doing it.
I have 3 rapid fire questions if you don't mind. I'll call them rapid fire because I don't think they need a lot of answer. But are there other contributors or companies that are going beyond prototyping with this and have actually maybe put it in?
There are people that have told me they're trying to use it. I don't have concrete feedback on that, but there are other people who are interested in this and probably tried it more than we have already.
I think one person said he was already using it in production for several small things though.
Okay.
So
What was kind of nice is when we started this, we found out after the fact we bumped into at least 3-4 other projects that had gotten off the ground that were really trying to do the exact same thing, make Postgres into a document database. And in some cases, they were explicitly doing to replace Raven. We got a lot farther along. One guy actually kind of quit and just said, I just want to use yours. But I think, to me, the fact that so many other people were interested in that and wanted to try to do it themselves says a little bit about the viability of the idea.
Okay. Administering Postgres on the server, I imagine it's going to be similar to SQL Server, but there's going to be differences on what knobs to turn and stuff like that. What's the idea or do we need a DBA for Postgres?
yes,
Hire for one? Is that kind of what we're talking about?
I think we should anyway. If we're going to go down this route, I mean, I'm not questioning their capabilities.
Sure.
I just think we gain benefit by getting somebody that has experience in this area.
Okay.
And if they'll let us, why not do it anyway?
Yeah. Okay. Are there risks or things we know we don't know about using Postgres that you guys have identified, or we got things we got to mitigate or have got to be at the top of the list? If we're going for this, is the first thing we should
The
tackle.
whole purpose of us going towards Postgres is because it's a mature product.
Yeah.
Like there are thousands and thousands of companies using this product. So I don't think we should look at that from like is this trustworthy?
No, that's not what I mean. What I mean is there are things we don't know about Postgres that can be known, but have we identified any that are like, that's probably the first thing we got to find
We're
out?
absolutely not going to throw this into production until we've done performance and load testing.
Mhm.
And since we strongly believe that Postgres itself is proven, that's going to be in the Marten code, and we control the Marten code. So it's going to be just like any other code that we write. It's not proven until we use it and test it and all that good stuff.
I have a question to piggyback on that one. It's like, I get that Postgres is proven, just, like other tools might be proven, like the sledgehammer is proven, but not if you use it to brush your teeth. Are we, the way that we're going to use Postgres, is that proven? And if not, have we really kind of dug around, sniffed around to see how can we prove it? How can we test it up front to make sure that it will scale to our needs in the way that we use it?
At a first step, as far as who is using it outside, I don't know yet. What we definitely want is to try to get some pretty serious help from the test engineers to do some heavy duty performance load testing.
I mean, we're not the only people using PostgreSQL's JSON B data type. Like, just search on Google for it. It's like there's hundreds of results of companies switching to use it. So, and switching to use it over MongoDB and other document data storage options, particularly because of the maturity and the performance. I don't want to try and oversell it, but I would just say that my concerns are not as strong as yours for that specific issue.
Mine was more curiosity.
I have a question.
I'm gonna follow.
Go ahead, Scott.
Is that it?
Go ahead.
Thanks, man. So you mentioned just now MongoDB, and I've been curious since we started this, what drove the decision to build on top of Postgres rather than looking at Mongo, looking at Couch, looking at almost any other existing graph database?
So Couch is a different animal, and we did look at Couch, didn't we?
We looked at it before Raven.
So we're already using Raven. We're already using Raven and trying really hard here to make the API and even some of the usage very similar to Raven. That's purposely to make it easier to. Should I shut down the broadcast?
Oh, sure.
Yes, hang on one second.
We're going to use Postgres exactly